Thank you for coming today. First, I want the public to know that I, my cabinet, Mayor Harry Kim, and many others are hard at work trying to find a path to a peaceful resolution to this situation. As you know, I strongly believe that respect for Mauna Kea and the explorations for the origins of the universe can coexist in a way that benefits the entire community. These efforts are ongoing, and I am open to conversations and discussions that can lead to a peaceful solution. But today's press conference is not about whether or not TMT should be built or how this situation will be solved. Today's press conference is about how we speak to one another and how we treat one another while we work towards this path of a resolution. First up is Attorney General Connors.
In the days following the removal of the unpermitted structure near Pu'uhuluhulu, we became increasingly concerned about some of the language that we saw appearing on social media and in some of the public messaging surrounding and related to the protests on Mauna Kea. Some of this language did predate the events of last Friday, the removal operation, but it has created a consistent and repeated narrative that we believe falsely characterizes law enforcement, characterizing law enforcement as out to get people who oppose construction of the telescope, or out to harm the very people that law enforcement is sworn to protect. This false narrative about law enforcement sets a tone, it causes alarm, and it can cause people to react. For the purposes of today, what we did is we identified a few examples from social media so that we could talk about them. The first slide here is a picture of an alert that was sent out on September 3rd. In this alert that was posted on social media and then spread rapidly throughout social media, we see the words excessive force and punish and suppress our people being used to characterize the anticipated enforcement actions by law enforcement officers. To be very clear, law enforcement does not use excessive force as a tactic or as a strategy against anyone. Law enforcement responds to the type of conduct that it encounters when it encounters that conduct, and it responds accordingly and appropriately. Enforcement of the law, addressing illegal conduct, is not excessive force per se. It is not punishment or suppression per se. To be clear, only persons who disobey lawful orders, including an lawful order to clear a roadway, risk being arrested. And as the events of a few weeks ago demonstrate, law enforcement officers have carried out these duties. They have attempted to do so respectfully and with utmost care, and as much as they could under the circumstances that they have encountered. Here is a second slide, just another one showing some of the language that's used, identifying this idea that helicopters are going to create chaos by using the rotor wash to blow everything away. Here's another alert that came out on September 6th. This one says that law enforcement is going to coordinate their attack on the people who are protesting on the public roadway. Words like attack, which are used repeatedly in social media messages and publicly, promote, again, this dangerous and false narrative about law enforcement. This kind of language leads people to believe that law enforcement is about to perpetrate a crime. Again, enforcement of the law is not a crime. So we have another slide here. Okay, this slide now is a slide that has been spreading throughout social media. After that unpermitted structure at Pu'uhuluhulu was removed, this post appeared. It's a $5,000 reward offered for the identity of the law enforcement officer who was part of that very tense and volatile operation to safely remove that unpermitted, unauthorized structure last Friday. We have addressed the events surrounding this particular incident on multiple occasions, but I hope that we can all agree that putting a bounty on the head of a law enforcement officer is disturbing and deeply concerning. It's dangerous. This law enforcement officer showed up to work that day, and he was doing his job when he found himself in an untenable situation. I hope that we can all agree he does not deserve to be targeted like this. Other state employees have also been subjected to these kinds of targeted threats. Here we have an excerpt from a post that targeted an employee who was involved in that operation to remove the structure that day. This post actually had a picture of that employee underneath it. There was also a live stream that was going on at the same time the operation was happening. During the course of this live stream, this employee's name, his phone number, where he lives, was published throughout social media. Following the events, he received an audio message to his voicemail. Other employees have received such voicemails. We thought it was important for the public to hear this particular voicemail, if we could play it.
How you can even say mahalo? How you can even call yourself Hawaiian clown? How you a clown, dog? Everybody in Oahu know this number. Everybody on Maui know this number. Everybody on Kauai, Molokai, Big Island, everybody know your number, clan. You're a clown. You choose to stand for your job and your people. The people is suffering and you watch it go down. Clown, I hope you die.
So that voicemail ended with, "I hope you die." These are disturbing. These are the kind of threats, these are the kind of types of attacks that state employees are receiving, and we ask all, on all sides of this, to condemn that kind of action. We have another slide here now, which is of other state employees who have been targeted during this discourse. This is a post that also went out throughout social media. This employee's face, name, and information was posted, and then there was the line, "Just kill yourself, old man. You're wasting all this free oxygen." Here's a post of a employee of TMT. Again, his face, his name, his information was posted, and there was the line, "Time for the Hawaiians to start assassinating these terrorists." Here is a set of slides that were posted on social media about individuals who were engaged in lawful demonstrations in support of TMT. We have here, again, it's redacted for safety, we have here a line, "I think we have to kidnap her too," and that's referring to one of the individuals holding a sign in support of TMT. Now, we acknowledge that not all individuals and persons involved in this movement are associated with this type of conduct, and we're not suggesting that they condone it. But it is important for all who post, for all who send out public messages, to take care and to really think about the repercussions of words that are used, especially when they create narratives that can cause people alarm and can cause people to react. I'll leave you with this slide. Law enforcement is not the enemy here. As I said, law enforcement is there to keep people safe, and that is what they have demonstrated they will do under these circumstances that have lasted for the last few weeks. They will respond as necessary and as appropriate to the type of conduct that they encounter. And state employees, the same goes for them. They are people doing their job, and this is a very stressful, intense moment in the state of Hawaii where they find themselves attempting to do their jobs. No one on any side of the current issue deserves to be targeted with threats or other forms of harassment, and again, we hope that everyone can agree with that. I'll turn it now to Director Espinda.
As the Director of the Department of Public Safety, I have the responsibility and privilege of leading the law enforcement officers of the Sheriff's and the Narcotics Enforcement Division. As you all saw, it was a deputy sheriff who was target of the posting offering a $5,000 reward. Just like other people up here, as a director, I accept there's a certain amount of criticism that will be directed at me. That goes with being a public figure. But this post directed at an individual who day in and day out puts his life on the line as a law enforcement officer and a public servant is shameful and should not be condoned. The law enforcement personnel were tasked with clearing and securing an unpermitted structure while providing for everyone's safety in a dynamic and unstable situation. No employee should be targeted for doing their job. In this instance, protesters securely affixed 2x4s with nails through a flag that was screwed into plywood barricade into the only door to the structure. The screws were stripped, so that the flag could not be removed without damage. For the safety of everyone, law enforcement did what it had to do to clear and secure the structure. They were left with no other option but to remove the flag, despite the purposefully destructive way it was intentionally attached to the barricaded door. I stand by my law enforcement officers. This is an orchestrated controversy that directly led to this egregious social media posting. The law enforcement officers who have been on the ground since the beginning have shown nothing but respect for the people gathered at the site. This kind of threatening action against law enforcement, or against anyone for that matter, is unacceptable and should not be dismissed or otherwise normalized. Thank you.
Aloha, everyone. We acknowledge that there is passionate debate going on within families and within the community. And like Director Espinda, the criticism that comes to public officials is something that we accept. However, state employees, and make no mistake, their families are included, state employees and their families should never be exposed to these types of attacks. My fear, as well as everyone standing behind me, our fear is that someone is going to be incited by the rhetoric, the negative rhetoric that is out there, to incite someone who may not be the deliverer of the message to cause harm to a state employee who's innocently, or their family who's innocently doing their jobs. And I can tell you in talking to our state employees that their families are deeply impacted and affected by this type of attacks that are occurring on social media. This is not the fabric of Hawaii that I grew up knowing. Thank you.
As governor of the state of Hawaii, I'm calling on everyone responsible for these examples of cyberbullying and hateful speech to stop immediately. Personal attacks and threats of violence have no place in America and certainly no place here in Hawaii. For those who claim to be protecting Hawaiian values, to resort to these tactics is disappointing, irresponsible, and very painful for me to see. And I see in the comments section of the news terrible and racist things being said about protesters as well. I completely denounce these kinds of horrible attacks against those opposed to TMT. Whatever happens with this project, those kinds of postings are not acceptable here. They don't represent who we are, and I urge the public to completely reject them. Law enforcement has created time and space for dialogue and discussion to take place. Let's all take this opportunity to try to understand one another and to support one another in finding solutions for our common challenges. We cannot allow these kinds of attacks to be part of the process. Hawaii deserves better. Thank you.
Any questions on topic? Hi, Jennifer from the Associated Press. Is the point of this to call out bad behavior or discourage bad behavior, or are there any efforts made to pursue harassment charges or any kind of law enforcement action against?
It is to call out the bad behavior and really call on everyone to reject them, but we are taking law enforcement.
Yeah, there are definitely violations that could be investigated and that might warrant some kind of action, but that would be something that we would do on a case-by-case basis.
And none of that has happened yet? No investigation into any of these cases?
No, to these in particular I won't comment, but certainly our office is involved in investigating all kinds of threats and actions against anybody involved in this type of discourse.
Attorney General or the Governor, has there been any targeted threats, death threats against you, Governor, or anyone on your administration?
So I am aware of death threats made against me personally and others in the administration.
And what kind of investigation is now happening because of that?
We won't comment on ongoing investigations, but as I said, there are violations available under the state law that we could pursue, and there are investigations that are ongoing to some of these threats.
Is security ramped up here and around the governor and around other members of the cabinet because of these potential threats?
Want to respond to that, Governor? No, there's no additional security ramp up in the way that you describe it. This is really just an opportunity for us to look out for our employees and for people who are on the line doing their jobs.
What are some of those violations to the law specifically?
Sure, there are terroristic threatening violations against persons who are involved in their public service duties. There are potential extortion, depending on how the facts play out, what kind of evidence comes to play. Those two come to mind.
Attorney General,
Yes.
Where does the line fall between protected free speech and putting a bounty on someone, for example? Like, when do we cross the line from First Amendment to violation of the law?
Right. And we've been very clear to say that there is a lawful expression of speech, and then there's unlawful conduct. And the violations that I just cited, they all have different elements. And if the evidence demonstrates that there clearly was an intent to threaten someone or to impact the ability of a public servant to engage in their public service duties, to engage in their employment, then that could rise to the level of a crime.
Have you been successful in getting these kinds of posts taken down by the social media communities that they're posted, and what is the result in that, really?
Right. The Facebook, for example, those types of platforms are very concerned about posting of phone numbers or posting of information. So they have been responsive when we've asked for that kind of information to be taken down.
Have you taken these concerns to the leaders of the protest, and what has their response been?
I mean, we haven't specifically taken any of the specific examples displayed here. We obviously have talked about wanting to assure safe and peaceful resolution of the situation.
Governor, while you're up there, have these types of threats changed your approach to handling the situation at all? Is it making you less willing to engage in a dialogue or to allow it to proceed as long?
No, certainly I am, and we as a state is committed to engaging protesters in any meaningful discussion or engagement that can result in a solution. You know, I continue to be open to have discussions with protesters, and I have had many conversations with various groups who have had suggestions and ideas about ways that this situation could be resolved peacefully.
Attorney General, is there evidence that the threats and harassment is going in multiple directions? Maybe those who support Mauna Kea against TMT supporters, just going back and forth.
I think if you look at the discourse out on social media, if you look at the type of postings when anyone has some kind of public message out there, there is a cause for concern on all sides. And that's why the governor's emphasized this message to go out to everybody who's involved in this discourse. What we, again, are really concerned about here is what's happening to our employees, and to be sure that base are not the type that we're displaying here today. And also specifically, Jennifer, to your question, I do think it is important to note that we're not identifying any particular protest leader or any particular part of the protest movement as associated with any of these different protest type reactions, but it's something that we want all people to be concerned about, and all people who engage in any kind of public posting or any kind of messaging through social media to be aware of the kind of language that they do use. Are there any other questions?
Governor, I know there were a lot of rumors this week that there was pending law enforcement action. Was there any justification for that, or was it founded? I know nothing happened, but do you have any idea where that came from?
No, I don't have any idea about where it came from, but obviously none of that happened. There was no plan for any action this week.
And how about going forward?
Yeah, we continue to look for opportunities for a peaceful resolution. We will not comment on any specific operational aspects of this going forward.
Do we have any more questions on the topic?
Mr. Smith, have the law enforcement that are currently stationed there, have they experienced any increased hostility from the protesters since that building was taken out, or is it still business as usual there?
I think business as usual is an accurate description. Both parties, law enforcement and the protesters, have been very respectful of each other, and this unfortunate situation is not reflective of what's happening up there on the mountain.
So to be clear, all of these threats and any kind of threatening action that's being taken either on the TMT or pro-TMT and anti-TMT side is not currently happening at the mountain. It's happening all via social media and web.
What we're concerned about today is with the messaging, right? So it's hard to say where a post gets placed into social media, but for now what we're concerned is what we find being experienced by our employees and what we find the social media doing with respect to targeting some of these employees and their actions. Yes, Tim.
Since you put people on notice, are you going to get more aggressive about pursuing these threats or anything like that?
Anytime there is a threat against a public service employee, we take it all very seriously. What we're trying to do here is not to talk about specific investigations or specifically how we're doing it, except to say that we are conscious of it and we do address them as they rise to the level that we need to take investigative action. Today's message is more about asking that the discourse and the kind of words and language that we use in this discourse is thought through very carefully for their possible ramifications.
Attorney General, have any law enforcement individuals or agencies refused to participate in the operation here because of threats?
No.
Okay, thank you, everybody.